Hi, my name is Athia Choudhury. I am an assistant professor in the Asian American Studies Department here at UC Davis. My research focuses on Asian American third world feminisms and post-colonial theory with an emphasis on militarized eating cultures. And so I came to my work trying to understand this question of what does health look like? What does health feel like? And when did we first learn to experience our bodies as a problem? And so my current book project is trying to understand how wellness and diet culture intersect with a larger project of US imperial expansion and war and militarism. Looking at it as health and wellness as an ideological export of US empire. I focus on health and wellness technologies in a range of ways, from the calorie to powdered and fat-free milk to the hyperfixation on protein. And in this investigation, it allows me to sit with archival materials that demonstrate how the act of eating has been transformed through a scientific and economic lens throughout the 20th century. I am really invested in interdisciplinary scholarship, and one of the things that really excited me about Davis in particular is that it has this rich history of agricultural sciences and food studies, right? And so I think that there's a cohort of folks across disciplines who are thinking about food, agriculture, land, environment in really capacious ways. And I would be really excited to collaborate on it, especially in this moment where we're seeing restrictions and funding cuts to public health initiatives alongside things like the USAID program that is negatively impacting people all over the global South. I think part of my work does look at a critique of industrial food production and its dissemination into the global South, and is not about, critiquing the fact that we have public health initiatives or global health programs, but to ask this question of how do we do it better so that more people can benefit from these programs as we reach towards a more just future.
My name is Stephanie Ann Lumsden, and I am a Hoopa Scholar and new assistant professor in Native American Studies at UC Davis. My research as an abolitionist and feminist scholar examines the relationship between ongoing indigenous dispossession in California, specifically Northwestern California and the homelands of my people, and the development of the prison regime in California. What that means is I look at the carceral logics of invasion, genocide, and dispossession, and I trace them through historical figures such as Indian agents, the first tribal police, editors at newspapers, and I follow the archives they've left behind in order to explain the situation for tribal nations now that find themselves besieged by violent police and emboldened settlers that are imbued with the power, the killing power of the United States. I do feminist historical methods. I also do feminist abolitionist methods, meaning that when I engage with archives, I'm not reading along the lines of the state that narrates an archive. I'm actually using these methods to read against and in between, and to resuscitate or revive stories of California Indian resistance to carceral technologies and carceral violence in our homelands. My book project really seeks to untangle how we end up in California as this one of the largest prison regimes the world has ever seen, and how do I untangle that and demonstrate how incarceration is deeply related to indigenous dispossession and the displacement of indigenous sovereignty. And one of the ways I do that is look at ongoing practices of police violence, the oversaturation of policing and surveillance, particularly among communities of color and tribal communities. Yeah, so the goal of doing this kind of work, this anti-carceral abolitionist and anti-colonial work, is to change the material realities that we all find ourselves living under now. So what I want is for everyone who wants a livable future to engage seriously in thinking about how this top-down hierarchical and dogmatic power structure of a settler state isn't serving the interest of freedom or liberation for anyone, and that instead we need to turn toward one another and away from these states and think about how we can make life a joy on these homelands for everyone who's here now and for those who will come in the future.
My name is Dr. Brittani Orona. I'm an assistant professor of Native American Studies here at UC Davis, and I focus predominantly on Native American water history in California. I'm an enrolled member of the Hoopa Valley Tribe in northwestern California, and my work really centers Klamath River history, abolition ecologies, and really how Native people have resisted dam infrastructure from the 19th and 20th century onward. When I do my research, I am hoping to reach mainly California Indian people, other Native people, indigenous people broadly, so that we can begin connecting the dots on refuting and pushing back against settler state projects that make it difficult to live as Native people. So that's a big part of my work, is really talking to that. But I also would like other people to also understand the history of California, how we got to this place at this time in history, how we're in occupation essentially, and how my research helps to push back against narratives of erasure that exist here in California. So I think I'm hoping with the CAMPSSAH Fellowship that I interact with folks from other disciplines and really start thinking about interdisciplinary methods across the campus. I'd also really like to work with the STEM folks who are doing maybe similar work or thinking more broadly from the technical standpoint. So I really live in history and Native American studies, but there's always new ways to think about things, and I think that's the nice thing about this fellowship, is that we are talking to each other and we have a frame and a platform to do that. So I'm excited for that.
Hi, my name's Ty Rush, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science. In my research, I study the overlap between race, ethnicity, and politics and electoral institutions of the United States. More specifically, I address the question of why election laws are political to begin with. To address that question, my research takes two approaches. So in one vein, I look at electoral institutions themselves and who shapes them and what their motivations are, what the correlates of their behavior are, and that mainly looks at electoral elites and what motivates them. In my other vein of research, I look at how those electoral institutions and laws impact groups themselves, with a key focus on how those experiences differ across racial and ethnic lines. In looking at how electoral institutions and voting laws change, I specifically look at the history of the franchise in state legislatures. And so how were they changing electoral laws? What were they responsive to? And I connect that bit of history to present day politics in state legislatures by collecting aggregate data on state legislators themselves, their districts, and what influences their votes on electoral bills, whether they be to expand the franchise or to add more restrictions or protections against voter fraud. And in my book project, I look at the history of voter ID since the 1950s. And so having the chance to communicate with other scholars on projects and get feedback to make that project better is something that's very unique to CAMPSSAH and something that's an immensely exciting opportunity for me.